أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء وخاتم المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا بالقاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين واللعنة الدائمة الباقية لأعدائهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد, sisters and brothers in Iman, Assalamu alaikum. This is the sixth session that we have on the topic of Ijtihad, Taqleed, and Marjaiyyat. We have dedicated the last 5 sessions to the issue of Ijtihad. Just to give you an idea of, when we talk about Ijtihad and Marjaiyyat, how does this process work? Just to give you an inside look into it, so you can realize that although the answer in your istiftah would be one line, or the mas'ala in Tawzil Masail would be one line or one paragraph, small one, but it has a lot of discussion before that conclusion that you see. Now, there is a lot more to say, but I didn't want to just, go into it. We wanted to limit ourselves. And so from tonight, inshallah, we'll look at the issue of Taqleed. I think we just have about 2 more sessions. I don't think we will be able to go to the issue of Ehtiyat and different aspects of Marjaiyyat. But let us look at the issue of Taqleed. Keep in mind that at the moment, in the Shia world, the history and the time that we are going through, you will see that even the non-Muslim forces, those who try to undermine the Muslim faith, when it comes to Shia Islam, they have identified Marjaiyyat as one of the strongest bases of this community. If you look around in North America, you look at the organizations of other Muslim groups, they don't really have a unified system of how to deal with the religious issues. In many centers where they do not even have a quote-unquote alim, those who are qualified to give religious opinion based on their studies in seminaries of Medina or Cairo or Sham or other places of the Sunni world, or maybe India. But you will see that sometimes, in many cases, it is the executive of the organization which then makes religious decisions. There was an interesting case somebody told me just recently that one of these small centers, of course not of the Shia background, the management decided that, let us ask the membership in a general meeting whether we go for halal meat or the regular, from bazaar, because that's much cheaper. And they had, voting for it, and the majority said yes. So, the halal and haram now is being decided by the people, and they make the voting system. Whereas if you look at any Shia organization, whether they are conservative, liberal, moderate, whatever, in their mind they know that when it comes to religious issues, we don't have really an opinion. We have to follow the marja. And that itself is a very strong, element. If you look at even the situation, the way it unfolded in Iraq, America went in with whatever pretext it had, and although Ayatollah Sistani is not known to be somebody who gets involved in politics directly and all the time, but whenever the demand is there for him as a religious leader to get involved, in order to put the wrong back to the right track, he gets involved. One of the biggest things was that after the downfall of Saddam, the issue was of, who will write the Constitution. Americans have their own plan. U.S. administration under this main administration of U.S. in Baghdad by the name of Mr. Bremer, they had decided to themselves select a group of Shias and Sunnis and Kurds, a caucus kind of, more or less like Saqifa. They decide on their own that these are the Ahl al-Halli wal-Aqd. These are the elders of the country. They will sit down and they will make the constitution of the country. That is where Ayatollah Sistani gave this fatwa saying that any constitutional body appointed by anyone which is not elected by the people of Iraq will have no legitimacy at all. They sent him messages different ways, according to some of the reports. Even Bremer said to his advisors, "Who is this old man sitting in Najaf, telling us what to do?" And all those others, Iraqi, that he has surrounded himself with, they said, "Well, he's our marja. If he says no, he says no. You can't do anything." And that's where you come to realize that even the constitution was then, they were forced basically to go by the general election to elect the Constitutional Assembly, which formed and wrote the Constitution. So the position of Marjaiyyat in Shia community and history has been very well known to those who knew, and now even the political forces know. And so you will see that one of the targets of others, outsiders, is number one, Azadari of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, and number two is the Marjaiyyat. Our discussion is basically to see, because when they attack Marjaiyyat, they don't attack from outside. They attack it from inside, whether it's in the name of what I call pseudo-akhbarism. They are not really akhbari, those who claim now to be akhbari. They don't even know alif ba of akhbarism. What does it mean and what are the implications? Or even those who these days, they say, well, every person is responsible for themselves. Let them look at, Quran and Hadith, and themselves will decide what is halal and what is haram. Well, if you are able to reach to that point, yes, but not just as somebody who is with no background, And so this is where the issue of Ijtihad and Taqleed becomes very important for us. So we'll look at what is the basis. We looked at Ijtihad, and now we'll look at the issue of Taqleed. Number one, the word Taqleed itself. Literally it means, to follow somebody or to imitate somebody. And when it comes to the Islamic terminology, we are talking about a person following a Mujtahid in religious laws. So it's a very limited scope of following that we are talking about. And the basis of following, sometimes the word taqleed is translated as a blind following. Now you remember that this is not necessarily a blind following. It's actually an informed decision made by a lay Shia in order to follow an expert in Islamic laws. So yes, you might be following blindly in that sense, but it's not just based on blind following. You, as a Muslim, you know that you have to follow Islam. If you're not an expert, what do? You go to an expert and you follow his advice and his guidance. One of the questions which we hear many times, especially when they translate taqleed as blind following, immediately it's a negative connotation, because they're saying, oh, they are blindly following somebody. And this is where the issue comes up. It's not logical. It's not reasonable. It's not sensical to follow somebody. And this is where we have to see that, there are four possible ways of following someone else. The first one, an ignorant following an ignorant person. This is one possibility. The other is a more learned person following a less learned person. A third is a learned person following an ignorant person. And the fourth was a less learned person following a more learned person. These are the four possibilities as far as the concept of following someone else is concerned. And out of this, so you put a learned person and an ignorant person on the other side. You get four possible, scenarios. Out of this four, number one is wrong. Why would an ignorant person follow another ignorant person? Doesn't make sense. A more learned person following a less learned person, again, doesn't make sense. Then we come to a learned person following an ignorant person. That, again, doesn't make sense. The only following which is logical, reasonable, acceptable is a less learned person following a more learned person. You could have somebody, let's say, who is a PhD in physics, and he doesn't feel well. He has the capacity, if he wants to go on, he knows the language, he can go to the library and look at the medical books and start reading. Even after reading, he wouldn't really get to the conclusion because that's not his field. He's a learned person. He has a PhD in his own, expertise. But when it comes to medical issue, he's less learned, just knows basics. And that's where he would, feel obliged to go to a doctor who is learned in that field to seek his guidance and follow his prescription. He doesn't even ask him or challenge him, what are these things that you have written in the prescription for me? Doesn't even ask what are the ingredients there. They just go and buy it, and if it works, it works. And so this is a very normal thing, and this happens in every field of life. As I say sometimes, you look at the real estate issue. When we want to buy a house or even lease a property on a rental basis, there is an agreement which has to be signed. I was surprised when I was told that, we need a lawyer from both sides, and they will look at the ownership documents, and many things have to be signed there. And the issue was, I'm buying, and this fellow is selling. This is the money, and that is the house. Give it to me, and that's the end of the story. But no, there's so many, fine prints there and details that since I'm not in that field, it's not that I'm ignorant or illiterate or I cannot read. Probably language-wise, I would know even better than that lawyer sitting on the other side of the table many times. But he knows his area. And so even for that simple transaction of a property between the buyer and the seller, we need a lawyer to tell us how to go through it. And that's a very commonsensical, logical way of doing things. And so when we talk about Islamic laws, either we are expert and we do our own ijtihad, or we follow somebody who has spent his time and life in studying Islamic laws. If you remember in the very first session, so this is going back 6 weeks, I had explained the difference between usul ad-din and furu ad-din. Where does taqleed fit in? And we have looked at it in a very logical sense that usul ad-din deals with our beliefs. Usul ad-din, furu ad-din deals with our laws. When it comes to the beliefs and deeds, in both we need to have proof in what we believe in and what we are doing. But the difference is, in usul ad-din, it is individual's duty. Every individual has to have conviction and yaqeen about the basic aqidah of our madhab. But when it comes to laws of our madhab, it is not everyone's duty. It's a collective duty. It's wajib-i kifaya. It means if some people go and dedicate their life to become expert in Islamic laws, that would be sufficient. And this is where we said that In Usul al-Din, Taqleed is not valid. You cannot have Aqidah based on Taqleed. But when it comes to Amal, either you do Ijtihad, or you do Taqleed, or you do Ehtiyat. And so this is a very aqli basis of Taqleed in Furu al-Din. Now this is also supported for tonight. What we are going to see is Quran and the Ahlul Bayt. What do they say about Taqleed? As far as the Quran is concerned, there is a very interesting ayat in Surah Tawbah, ayat number 122, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically divides the community into two parts, two segments, as far as following the Sharia is concerned. And this is the context of this ayat is very interesting. Before this ayat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has strongly urged the believers to go for jihad, and we are talking about physical jihad here. So people were becoming very enthusiastic to go for jihad during the days of Rasulullah. All of a sudden, an ayat comes down, and it says, not everybody has to go for jihad. مَا كَانَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ لِيَنْفِرُوا كَافَّةً. It is not right for believers to go forth all together for jihad. No. فلولا نفر من كل فرقة منهم طائفة ليتفقهوا في الدين ولينظروا قومهم إذا رجعوا إليهم لعلهم يحذرون. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, not everybody has to go for jihad. Why should not a party or a group, a small group from every section of the believers, every community of the believers, go forth? Go forth for what? Number one, if you look at the red color there, لِيَتَفَقَّهُ in Arabic, to become learned in religion. So Allah says, why doesn't a group of mu'mineen dedicate their life? No, don't go for jihad. Spend your life in studying religion. يَتَفَقَّهُ فِي الدِّينِ means to become learned in religion. What will be their role when they have studied? Once they have learned and followed it themselves, وَلَيُنْذِرُوا. The second purpose is to warn their people, قَوْمَهُمْ. They will warn their people إِذَا رَجَوْا إِلَيْهِمْ when they return back to their communities. لَعَلَّهُمْ يَحْذَرُونَ. So that hopefully they will beware. And so this ayat is a very powerful ayat. And if you look at the concept there, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that He expects in every Muslim community of the mu'mineen that a small group should dedicate their life to go and study, to become learned in religion. What will be their role after they have learned? They come back and warn the people that this is right, this is wrong, don't do this, do that. Hopefully they will beware. Now, if you look at this ayat, basically, Allah in this ayat is dividing the learned on one side, means those who will become mutafaqqah fi deen, and qawmuhum, their people. And what is the duty of the learned is to warn, and the duty of the qawm is to beware. And this you can put, in other words, you can say guiding is the function of one group, and following is the function of the other group. This is where you get actually this concept of Ijtihad and Taqleed. The ayat doesn't use those words, but we can, exactly explain that the function of Ijtihad is people go into the, places of learning, and it depends in the time, in history where you are. It changes from one place to another. And once you have learned it, you come back, and your duty is basically to educate the rest of the community. And it's for them to beware and to be warned, and they have to follow. And so this concept of, role of the ulama as such, it is there best in the Quran, that we need, it's wajib kifai. This is where I come to this chart I had made earlier. It's wajib kifai. Some members of the community in every generation must dedicate their life in studying religion to become mutafaqih, to be learned in religion, so that they can guide the rest of the community. Just like you have a Muslim community, they have everything, but they don't have doctors. And of course, it is part of human, nature. People will become ill for one reason or another. Sometimes more, sometimes less. So it becomes even wajib kifai for some of them to go and learn medicine so that they can then, serve the rest of the community. So this concept of wajib kifai is where when a group of community does that act, then everybody else is absolved from it. And this is where we look at the concept of ijtihad and taqleed, which is based on a very aqli and rational way of understanding it. Now let us look at the perspective of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, the Ma'asumin. What have they said in this issue? Remember, we are talking about more ijtihad and taqleed in the time of ghaybat kubra, when we don't have access to the Imam directly. But in a limited form, the concept of ijtihad and taqleed existed even during the days when the Imams were accessible to the community, even from the days of the sixth Imam onwards. And this is what you will see here. And these are all just selected. I didn't bring all the ahadith on this issue, but these are just the example. One is a very prominent Sahabi of the sixth Imam by the name of Umar ibn Hanzala. He, in a very long discussion with the Imam, he talks about the issue of, that we live in a time when we have a ruler who is illegitimate. The Khulafa were zalim, and they appointed judges to, decide disputes among the people. And so it became a religious issue. Are two Shia who have dispute on a miras issue or a monetary issue, are they allowed to take their case to a zalim king or a judge appointed by a non-Islamic authority? And Imam recited a verse from Surah An-Nisa, ayat number 60, and Imam says, no. If you do this, it is like you are going and seeking judgment from other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by someone who is not authorized by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's not acceptable. And so he posed a question, which was very relevant, and it applies to us also now. What the two Shia should do then? This is a hypothetical situation. So if you are saying that these two Shias who have a dispute in a monetary financial issue, where do they go? And this is where the Imam gives the answer. He says, ينظران إلى من كان منكم ممن قد روى حديثنا ونظر في حلالنا وحرامنا وعرف أحكامنا فليرض به حكما. Imam says they must seek out one of your own, although he's still there. The Masum Imam is there, but he says you don't even have to come to me. You seek somebody from your own, the Shia, who, number one, narrates our hadith, means he's familiar with our hadith, who is versed in what is permissible and what is forbidden, knows our halal and haram, and I missed the words, our halal and our haram, means knows our laws, what is halal and what is haram, and then وَعَرَفَ أَحْكَامَنَا, and he is well acquainted with our laws and our rulings, and accept him as a judge and arbiter, for I فَقَدْ جَعَلْتُهُ عَلَيْكُمْ حَاكِمًا. Imam says, I have appointed such a person as a judge over you. So this is during the time of the sixth Imam. That, if the Shia has a problem, it means even Imam is saying that I would like to see in my community people who are familiar with my hadith, people who know what is my halal and my haram in my view, who know our ahkam and our rulings, and it is better for you to go to them and seek guidance rather than go to a judge who is appointed by others. And not only that, he goes further to say, فَإِذَا حَكَمَ بِحُكْمِنَا فَلَمْ يَقْبَلْهُ مِنْهُ فَإِنَّمَا اسْتَخَفَّ بِحُكْمِ اللَّهِ وَعَلَيْنَا رَدُّ وَالرَّدُّ عَلَيْنَا الرَّدُّ عَلَى اللَّهِ وَهُوَ عَلَى حَدِّ الشِّرْكِ بِاللَّهِ. Imam uses very strong words. He says, and if the ruling that he, based on our laws, is rejected, then this rejection will be tantamount to ignoring the order of Allah and rejecting us. And rejecting us is same as rejecting Allah, and it's almost close to shirk billah. So strong words that Imam is using about rejecting a judgment made by a Shia faqih. Let me put it this way. Instead of saying a Shia who knows the hadith, knows the halal and haram of Ahlul Bayt, who knows the ahkam of Ahlul Bayt. In other words, somebody who is a Mujtahid, if he is giving a judgment when you go for judgment and you reject it, Imam says as if you are rejecting me. And when you reject me, it's as if you are rejecting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so this is there in theory from the days of the sixth Imam. Another narration that we have is from Abu Khadija. This is again from the sixth Imam, where Abu Khadija says that Imam actually sent me with a message to be conveyed to the community. That whomever I see, I have to convey the message. And what is the message? The message is, if a dispute or a difference occurs among you about a property, then take care not to seek judgment from those illegitimate judges. Instead, you must seek a person who knows what is permissible and what is forbidden by us, for I appoint him as a judge over you, and take care that you do not seek judgment against one another with an unjust ruler. And this is where we see again the emphasis by Imam asking Abu Khadija to convey this message to the rest of the community. This is while the Imam is still accessible to the Shias. This was just a hypothetical statements that we have two of them. Let us look at some of the practical examples. Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur, he asked the Imam, and this is, not everybody lived in Medina, all the Shias, they lived in different, and there was no telephone, no email, nothing those days. So if you wanted to know meet the Imam, you might meet him maybe once in a few years, if you go for Hajj, for example. So not everybody can easily go from Kufa or Ahwaz or Egypt to Medina for issues which faced them. And so this is a question where Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur asked the sixth Imam. He says, I do not meet you all the times, nor is it possible for me to come to you. And at times one of our friends would come to ask a question from me for which I would have no answer. So we are talking about the presence of the Imam, huzur of the Imam, not ghibat. And the answer that Imam gives, Imam says, what prevents you from seeking guidance from Muhammad bin Muslim al-Saqafi? For he has heard many ahadith from my father and was respected in his views. So Muhammad bin Muslim is a very prominent Sahabi of the fifth and sixth Imam. And very close to the fifth Imam in a sense that sixth Imam used to say that if it hadn't been for Muhammad bin Muslim, the ahadith of my fathers would have been lost. And so this is where Imam says to Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur, if you don't see me, go to him, and he will guide you in the right way. So this is where Imam is saying that, if you have learned people in the community who know our halal and haram, you can refer to them. And this is what we simply, express by the word Taqleed. Number two, Shu'aib al-Aqraqufi, asking a similar question from the sixth Imam again. Sometimes we need to ask you certain things, so whom should we ask? And Imam says, take guidance from Abu Basir al-Asadi. Going on to the days of Imam Raza alayhi salam, we have a person by the name of Ali bin Musayyib, a very prominent narrator. He came to the Imam and he said, I live far away and cannot always come to you. So from whom shall I take the guidance for my religion? And the response was from Zakaria bin Adam al-Qummi. Means this was a fellow who lived in their locality or in their city or town. And so Imam says, you go to him. He's learned. He knows our halal and haram. He knows our hadith. He will guide you what is our opinion on this issue. So you see the concept of referring to an expert, somebody who is learned in religion, even in the presence of the Ma'soom Imam, if you don't have access to him, because of the distance or because of the political circumstances or whatever. Number 4, again, during the days of Imam Raza alayhi salam, we have two brothers by the name of Abdul Aziz and Hassan bin Ali bin Yaqteen. They asked Imam Raza alayhi salam, and the question was very simple, and this was in written form. I cannot always reach you to ask about our problems about religious teachings. Is Yunus bin Abdurrahman trustworthy enough for seeking religious guidance? So they are actually asking a Ma'soom Imam that if we cannot come to you, can we go to this fellow? And Imam says, yes, he is trustworthy. I accept him. You can refer to him. Number 5. This is Ahmad bin Hatim bin Mahway and his brother. Again, two brothers. This is the days of Imam Musa al-Kazim alayhi salam, where they are asking him this similar question that if we cannot come to you, where do we go? And Imam says, I have understood what you have written. In the matters of your religion, go to any person who has aged in our law, and anyone who has passed a long time in our issues, in our ahkam, in our beliefs, for they shall suffice you, insha'Allah. This is not giving a name. All other examples that we have, Imam is pinpointing a specific person. Go to him. Here, Imam, the 7th Imam, is not giving a name. He's saying anyone who is, mature. And he is known to be somebody who has lived with our law. Means he's a true Shia. And he has passed a long time in our issues, umurana, which means knows our views, what is our halal and what is haram. That would suffice you, insha'Allah. And number 6 is even more interesting for us, this example. And this is of Mu'az bin Muslim al-Nahwi. He was in Medina. And he used to sit in Masjid al-Nabi and give fatwas to people, while the Ma'soom Imam is there, in the same city, in vicinity of his house. His house is not that far from Masjid al-Nabi. But he's sitting in Masjid al-Nabi as a mufti. And what does Imam do? Does the Imam discourage him or become angry with him? No, there are actually two individuals who have been praised for giving fatwa during the time of the 6th Imam. One of them is this fellow. Imam says that it has come to my attention that you sit in the mosque and give fatwas to the people. Is this true? And he says, yes. And then he says, I wanted to ask you about it before I leave today's meeting, whether what I'm doing is right or wrong. And then he explained what I do, because not all Shias are coming there in the masjid. He says, I sit in the masjid, and when a person would come to me asking something, I do the following. He says, if I know that he is against you, he's not a Shia, then I answer him according to his fiqh. So he's a Sunni, I give him his Sunni fatwa. And then he says, when a person comes to me who is known for having love for you, Ahlul Bayt, and have affection for you, then I answer him according to what has come from you. I give the Shi'i perspective. And if I know a person I don't know about him, whether he is from us or from the other side, then I say to him that, there are different views on this issue. so and so says this, and in that variety of views, I include your views also. So if he's a Shia, he will take that one. If he's Sunni, he will take the Sunni one. And Imam actually responded by saying, continue to do so, and I also do the same. Now what does it show? It shows that during the days of the sixth Imam, you had people like Mu'az bin Muslim al-Nahwi, who was not only very well versed in the fiqh of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he also knew the fiqh of the Sunni ulama. And this is where we see, this has been a tradition among Shia ulama that we study comparative fiqh. There are books written during the days of Sheikh Tusi, where he had a book on fiqh. On all mas'ala, he would write the Sunni views, the four madahib, and the Shia views, and what is the basis of the Shia view. Then you have Allama Hilli, who has written a book called Tazkiratul Fuqaha, which is a very extensive work. And in every mas'ala, he gives the Shia and the Sunni perspective with their arguments and our arguments. And so, our ulama were not only narrow-minded in studying their own fiqh only. They actually even studied the fiqh of the other madahib. Because if you remember, we had a discussion last week and the week before that whenever we have contradictory ahadith, in order to prefer one against the other, one criteria is that you have to measure it with the Sunni view. Those which are according to Sunni view, you reject it and go with the other one. So you have to know the Sunni view on the Masail. And this is where we see that Imam is actually affirming this person who sits in Masjid al-Nabi during his own time, gives fatwa to the people when they ask religious questions of him. And, on that same note, let me just narrate to you my late father's example. Those of you who know his life in Africa when he started this Taqleed process, never done before by others, to bring the Africans into Shia madhab, one of the opening for him was a Sunni sheikh who somehow became friend of my father, and he was impressed with the Arabic language of my father. He used to sit down with him. He became a Shia then. And he actually had his own madrasa in Dar es Salaam. And when he converted, my father told him, don't make it a public display. Just keep it as a taqiyya. And it was then decided that he will go to his madrasa also and teach Sunni fiqh. A Shia alim going into the madrasa there to these religious students, teaching them Sunni fiqh. But my father used to go just as a visitor once in a week or so, and he would intentionally pick those masail where the proof of the Shia fiqh is more obvious from Quran. So he was first going through details of the Sunni fiqh, these are the rulings, these are the bases, but then at the end he will say, but by the way, there is another view in Islam. Not even say this is a Shia view. He'll just say there is a different view on this issue, and this is the basis of that view, this ayat, the way it's explained. And so after some time, they started asking, which is this other school of thought that you're talking about? And of course, you couldn't continue these guys for a long time. They realized he's a Shia himself. And so half of them just left, but other half remained, and that was actually the core of those who later on went to study in Najaf and Qom, and now they have become, Shia ulama of the African background themselves. And so my point is that this issue of studying Shia fiqh and Sunni fiqh is a tradition there from the ashab of the Imam, encouraged by the Imams themselves. Finally, on this issue, let me end with this reply which came from Imam Zamana Ajjalallahu Ta'ala Faraj Sharif, where a person by the name of Ishaq bin Yaqub. Now, some of the ulama have a lot of discussion about him, who was he, and this and that. But there is a view that he's actually the brother of Sheikh Kulaini. Muhammad bin Yaqub al-Kulaini, this is Ishaq bin Yaqub. And he had written, and so it's the same time, because Kulaini also lived during the Ghaibat Sughra of the Imam, so that's not really a far-fetched, concept. Ishaq bin Yaqub had written some questions and given to one of the four Naibin, and then they got the answer. And one of the questions was about al-hawadis al-waqi'ah, which means if new things happen, which has not been mentioned in the Quran, there is no hadith of the Imam about it, what do we do? And the Imam of the time responded by this sentence where he says, أما الحوادث الواقعة فارجعوا إلى رواة حديثنا فإنهم حجتي عليكم وأنا حجة الله. What it means is that as for the newly occurring circumstances, new things happen, you should turn for guidance to the narrators of our hadith, for they are my proof over you and I am Allah's proof. And so Imam is emphasizing, go to those who know our hadith. Now, ruwat hadithina doesn't mean those who just sit down and narrate the hadith, those who understand the hadith, those who know what is sahih and what is za'if, those who are able to deal with the contradictions among the ahadith. How would they resolve this? So we are not talking about just somebody who knows Arabic and just look at the book of hadith, so-called akhbari, as they are known these days, they call themselves. No, this is talking about somebody who has insight into the hadith of the Ahlul Bayt. And that is the function and the expertise of a Mujtahid. A Mujtahid is the one who does that. According to Ayatollah Khoui, in his discussion on this hadith, he says, the purpose why Imam mentions ruwat hadithina is because the fatwa of our Mujtahideen is, after all, best on the sunnat of the Ma'sumeen. So although the wordings are theirs, but it is based on the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, alayhimu salatu wassalam. And so this is where we see this concept of referring to the experts in Islamic laws is there, affirmed in the Quran as well as the seerah and the sunnat of the Ma'sumeen, alayhimu salatu wassalam. Just one, if somebody really argues about this issue, you can ask them, all Muslims, from conservative to the liberal, at least they know namaz is wajib. I don't think there's any Muslim, other than those who do bandagi, but that's a different situation. Otherwise, a regular Muslim knows that salat is one of the arkan and pillars of faith. Okay? Ask them, how do they do the salat? How will they be able to justify on the day of Qiyamah that when it comes to Fajr, time, I do 2 rakat. For Zuhrain, I do 4. For Maghrib, 3. For Isha, 4. Because when you look at the Quran, there is nothing there in Quran about the method of namaz. The only method of namaz that Allah mentions is in Surah Nisa, ayat number 102, and that is also not the regular namaz. The only method in Quran for namaz is namaz al-khawf, which is to be recited in battlefield or in emergency situations. And so if Allah wanted to do that, He could have done it. He could have given us the whole chapter of, Surah al-Salat in Quran, for example, with the masail of Salat. But He doesn't do that. It's not that there was a problem of, the editors or the publishers told Allah, okay, that's the limit, no more ayat can be written here. No. The purpose is Allah wanted to force people to go to the Rasul. That the order of Quran is there, the order of Salat is there in the Quran, but the method you will learn from my Rasul. And so you cannot say on the day of Qiyamah to Allah that, oh, well, I looked at the Quran, it says how to do the namaz. You will be forced to go to the hadith. But not everybody can go and look at the hadith. Even if you go and study it, there's so much contradiction in there, you have to realize you will be more confused. The whole issue of how to place your hand on this chest or on a stomach, or straight. Well, so a layman cannot even handle hadith unless he has become expert in ilm hadith or ilm fiqh. And this is where I'm saying that on the day of Qiyamah, the only way we can justify what we do as far as namaz is concerned, there are only two answers. Either you can stand up on that day of Qiyamah and say to Allah that I studied Islamic laws, researched the Islamic sources, and acted according to my ilm and knowledge. In other words, I was a Mujtahid. So Allah will say, okay, you studied, and your justification for how you did namaz is acceptable. Or the other would be, I had no knowledge of Allah. I was a businessman, not interested in fiqh and hadith, but I referred to those who were learned in fiqh and hadith, and I followed them. This is Taqleed. And that answer also on the day of Qiyamah will be acceptable. Of course, there is a third one, which is Ehtiyat, which is even more difficult. We'll talk about it later on. But my point is that anybody who says, I don't want to do Taqleed, but I still want to be a practicing Muslim, they should answer this question. How will you justify the method of your namaz on the day of Qiyamah? Because there are only two ways. Either you are a Mujtahid, learned in that field to make that decision, or you are following somebody who is an expert in that field. One more important issue is the issue of, when we talk about Taqleed, and we don't really have much time for the conditions of the Mujtahideen. We'll discuss that next week, inshallah. But this point is very important, and I would like to end with the hadith of the 11th Imam on this issue. It's not only the knowledge. These days, even the Western scholars are studying Shia Islam, especially after the Islamic revolution of Iran. This has become a main, focus of studies in the Islamic studies of the Western universities. It is very possible sometimes you will see discussions, research work done by them on some very limited topics, issues, but very in-depth. Sometimes I was surprised to read an academic article published in an academic journal by an Israeli scholar of Shia Islam. And he was talking about the status of illegitimate child in Shia fiqh. And a very extensive, I was first of all surprised by the topic. Why? Why would this be a big issue for him? But when I look at the resources that he has used, they are all primary resources of Shia fiqh, the sources, and very extensive. So you can have even a non-Muslim who studies Shia fiqh technically become an expert. Do you just follow him? No. You look at all the ahadith where the Imams have said, go and look somebody from us. An aged person who is aged in our law. So this condition of Islam and Tashayyu and Wilayat of Ahlul Bayt is integral part of Ijtihad and Taqleed. So you can have the best of expert in Islamic laws, but if he's not a follower of Ahlul Bayt, you can't say, okay, I'll go and follow him. No. You have to follow, and so there are certain conditions which are required there for a Mujtahid. And the most important thing is the issue of the character. It's not only the knowledge. And that is why there was a tradition till now in the Hawza where they really do not give you a certificate. Because they say, what will this certificate do? The certificate only, if you have knowledge, you don't really need a certificate. It will come out. And if you have knowledge, but you don't have taqwa, who is going to certify you for taqwa? There is no mechanism where somebody can certify that he is adil or he's fasiq, or this and that. So there was never this concept of having a certificate as such in the Hausa traditions. I'm told Ayatollah Khoei, he trained 3 generations of Mujtahideen, but there are only 3 or 4 people whom he has given the written certificate of Ijtihad. It's not that there were only 4 of them, but the issue is that this is more a, what you call, tashrifati. It's more a, it's more a protocol type. There is not a religious requirement as such. And so the character is very important. If you look at, there was a discussion by some of the Shias during the days of the 6th Imam, where they were saying that Quran has condemned the Jewish people for blindly following their rabbis. And so the 6th Imam, and this is a narration coming from 11th Imam, quoting the 6th Imam, where Imam says that, well, they were wrong. And then he gives us a warning and he says, and similarly, if the lay people of our ummah, referring to the Shias, know in their jurists, if they have learned people in the community who are known for their open sinfulness, strong racial solidarity, prefer one race over the other, have greed for the vanities of this world and its forbidden things, or are opposed to those whom they should be helping, or they help those whom they should be opposing, then the Imam says, then whoever from our people follows such learned scholars, then they are like the Jews who have been condemned for following their rabbis. But then the flip side, Imam says, but if there is anyone among the jurists, the fuqaha, the mujtahideen, who is in control of his own self, the words used by the Imam is sa'inan li nafsi. He controls his own desires. وَحَافِظًا لِدِينِهِ, he protects his religion, suppresses his evil desires, مُخَالِفًا لِحَوَاهِ, not only controls his nafs, but he suppresses his evil desires, وَمُطِيعًا لِأَمْرِ مَوْلَاهِ, and he is obedient to the command of his master. فَلِلْعَوَامِ أَنْ يُقَلِّدُوا, the word يُقَلِّدُوا has been used by the Imam, then the people should follow him. Yuqallidu is from Taqleed. Then people should follow him. So we see that the Imam is talking about certain characteristics which should be there in a learned, faqih. And then Imam ends by saying, and these qualities will not be found except in some Shia jurists, not all of them. And that is why, we may have hundreds and thousands of mujtahideen, but not all of them become marja'. Because to become marja', a point of reference for the lay people, there are all different other conditions which are required. Let me just end with one statement. Sometimes we hear these words even from some of the scholars, intellectuals who say, oh, this Shia, Ijtihad and Mujtahid, and these are all new things in Shia history, only 200 years ago, and before there was nothing like that. Well, probably there were no words like that, but if you look at the process, in practice it was there from the days of the 5th and 6th Imam. But let me read to you something from Dr. Devin Stewart. He's in Salt Lake City, Utah University there. And he's one of the experts on Shia fiqh there. And he, in a book which is known as the Islamic Legal Orthodoxy, 12 Shiite Responses to the Sunni Legal System, published by the University of Utah. Probably he's not the professor there, but this is the book published in the University of Utah Press. There he makes a comment which is very interesting, and this is for those who don't really accept our words unless it is supported by a Western scholar. And of course, not you, there are some people who might be listening. He says, and he writes, a prevalent misconception concerning the Shiite legal system is that the exclusive authority of the Shia jurists, jurist means Mujtahideen, was not established until quite recently, even as late as 19th century. While it may be true that the institution of Marjaiyyat Taqleed did not take recognizable shape until the 19th century, the location of the religious authority among senior Mujtahideen and the division of the Shia community between jurists and laymen is nearly as old as the 12er Shia legal mazhab itself. So he himself says that this system that there were Mujtahideen and the Awam who used to follow the Mujtahideen, this division has been there from the time where the Shia Isna Ashari madhab has existed. And so when we hear all these things about, oh, this is all invention of the Safavid era of Iran and this and that, they really don't know what they are talking about. We already covered about almost an hour now, so we'll stop here in 5 minutes for questions. Inshallah, next week we will continue with the discussion of Ijtihad and Taqleed. Yes? I'm not saying we don't study their works. The way I mentioned this example because I looked at it and it's interesting the way he has put everything, all the information together. The point is we cannot do their taqleed. That was my point. There's nothing wrong in studying what others have done the research about our madhab. So that's not a problem. When it comes to Chitik's, if you look at his writings, he's more a Sufi-oriented person, but he respects and has high regard for the Ahlul Bayt. I might not be able to say he's a Shia, but he has respect for the Imams, and therefore using his research work would not be a problem. My point is that even if they reach the highest level, we cannot say, okay, in our fiqh masala, we will refer to them and ask, okay, what's your masala, your opinion on this issue? So it's the issue of following, which is a prohibition, but studying their works or, taking benefit from it, or even using, for example, translation of Sayyid Sajjadiyah that Dr. William Chittick has done, it's a good translation. Sahif Sajjadiyah, it has one translation done earlier in India. Hopefully others will come up, inshallah. Because even Chittick is a little bit very sort of, what do you call, King's English. I don't think the normal person, when he reads that, he doesn't really get that feeling in it. So even that has to be simplified. Okay, we'll end with the dua. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Let me request you also to recite Amma Yujib 5 times for fast recovery of the brothers and sisters who are in need of our du'as, especially our brother in Toronto by the name of Rizvi. He has just been taken ill in the hospital, so let us recite Amma Yujib for him and the others also. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء 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 أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء.